Good morning. Our subject for this morning is challenges for the Bedouin community in Israel, particularly healthcare challenges. The speaker for this is Yasmeen Abu Fraiha, a medical doctor specializing in internal medicine, currently acting as the executive director of an NGO she founded to help prevent genetic diseases in the Middle East, especially within the Bedouin community. Yasmeen also serves on the boards of other NGOs and has won a number of awards, including the 2007 Ramon Award for Quality, Leadership, and Excellence. She was also chosen for the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. After her talk, there will be a Q&A session where you can address your questions directly to the speaker. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Yasmeen Abu Fraiha.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is a great honor to be invited to speak with you today. I will share my story. Let me just share my screen first. Let's see. Can you all see this? Show me some thumbs up. Awesome, that's great. Okay, so as Ellen beautifully introduced, I will talk to you a little bit today about the healthcare issues in the Bedouin community in Israel, and with a specific focus on Bedouin villages and unrecognized villages. And we will have plenty of time for a Q&A later. So I will start by introducing myself. So my name is Yasmeen. I'm a Wexner Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School this year. This is me here on the screen. And my story begins in Tel Sheva. Tel Sheva is a Bedouin town in the south of Israel. It's actually the first Bedouin town that was established by the Israeli government for the sedentarization of Bedouins, and I will talk a little bit more about this later. This is my grandfather, I'm sorry, who was, a real nomadic Bedouin with his camel and next to a well in Beersheba, which is like the biblical city of the seven wells. And these are my beautiful parents who made a very critical, important decision that changed the entire trajectory of our family, because they wanted us to have better education and better lives. And they knew that in Bedouin towns it will be very, very difficult to do so. They've decided to move to a Jewish town called Omer when I was only 5. So just to help you understand a little bit about the differences. So Tel Sheva is one of the poorest towns in Israel, has the lowest socioeconomic status in grading. And this is how it looks like, okay? This is like the shacks and the tents that we see surrounding Tel Sheva. This is how my father grew up. Okay? He grew up in a tent. Their school was basically a tent with sand sacks as chairs and tables. But he went to the Technion to study engineering and came back and became the first Bedouin engineer and wanted a better future for his children. So they moved to Omer. Omer is what you see on the right side of the screen. This is one of the most affluent towns in Israel. Most people who live there are doctors, professors in the university, in Ben Gurion University in Beersheba. Very, very rich, liberal Jewish community. So my father always said, and still says actually, that the difference between the two towns are maybe 5 minutes drive by car, but then the distance is about 100 years in development. But that actually made it easier for me to get into med school in Jerusalem. When I graduated med school I did my internship in Soroka, in Beersheba, in the hospital. And then when I wanted to, I had to figure out what residency I wanna progress and do my, my what kind of expert I want to be. And during this time of debating, I stumbled upon an opportunity to be in a fellowship at Brandeis University. It was 2016. And it was a fellowship called Our Generation Speaks. I don't know if you know about this, but it's actually a fellowship for Israeli and Palestinian entrepreneurs who come for a summer in Brandeis to build their own social ventures. And I remember this was the first time for me to be in an American university. And the first week, my first challenge was kind of exciting in a way. You are American, so I believe you are going to know the answer for this question. But this was my first challenge, because I came to the cafeteria and I found this wonderful machine that had a lot of magic in it. And it took me a while to figure out how to get water out of this machine. And I guess you know, when I show it to Israelis, they keep thinking that it's in the ice area, but actually I've learned that this button helps you get water, and also the way you use it is a little bit different than the other buttons. And why am I telling you this story, and what is the connection to Bedouins? So I want to say that this was my aha moment of understanding that health should be easy. And more than that, if we want to prevent diseases, it has to be easy. If it's easier for me to get Coke than water, then I will drink Coke, okay? If it's easier for me to get sugar than healthy products, I will eat sugar. And this was the state of mind for me and my team when we started Odaina, that prevention should be the easiest choice of action. And if we want to prevent diseases, and specifically genetic diseases, we need to make it easy for people. But then we started to unpack the challenges. So I will tell you a few stories of what happened to me during my internship to make it a little bit more understandable, the challenges that Bedouins have to face when we talk about health. So first case happened to me when I was an intern in the internal medicine department. I had a beautiful, very nice 50-year-old lady who had lung disease, obstructive lung disease, mostly because of exposure to open fires, smoke, other people smoking around her. But this is very, very common in the population I work with. And she came with pneumonia, with a respiratory infection. It was winter time, and what we usually do is give steroids, we give some inhaled drugs, we give oxygen, and after 2 to 3 days, the patients get better. Same happened to her; she got better, and she was discharged. And after less than a week, she came back with the same infection. Again, we treated her, we gave her everything, like all the drugs, the oxygen, and we discharged her after 2 to 3 days. And then again, less than a week later, she came back with the same problem. And I, being, very judgmental, as doctors know how to be, I asked her, lady, what is going on? Why are you not taking your drugs at home? And are you getting your oxygen that you need to get? Because these patients get oxygen 24/7 at home. And she had her own oxygen generator. But then she said to me, listen, I live in a village with no electricity, and we use solar panels. And since this is winter, and sun sets early, and we need the electricity to other things too, by midnight we ran out of electricity, and this is what I can do. I mean, there's no oxygen during the night because the generators run on oxygen. So this helps me a little bit to talk more about the situation of the Bedouins. So this was all an introduction, but maybe it's a good time to talk numbers. So in Israel, there are 330,000 Bedouins who are Israeli citizens. There are other Bedouins around the world, about 25 million in the Middle East and North Africa. And I'm not going to talk about those who are not citizens. So some live in Sinai, in the Gaza Strip, in West Bank. I'm not going to talk about them in this conversation, though. If you want to ask some questions later, I'll be happy to answer. Out of those 330,000, 270,000 live in the Negev, so in this area. I hope you can see my pointer. Most of them actually in this very small area surrounding Beersheba. I'll show you later. We will do some zoom in. They are a third of the population of the Negev. 60,000 live in the Galilee. Okay, around here. They used to be nomads. They according to history books, they walked in the desert from the Gulf area and spread all across the Middle East and North Africa. And 100,000 of those who live in the Negev live in what we call unrecognized villages. The unrecognized villages are villages that the government of Israel is not recognizing as formal towns or villages or settlements. You call them as you wish. But this has an important meaning when we talk about infrastructure. So just to zoom in a little bit, this is what we call the Saig Triangle. Saig Triangle is a geographic triangle surrounding Beersheba, in which Israeli Defense Forces after 1948 forced all Bedouins to move into. And this triangle is the triangle between Beersheba, which is here, and this is the biggest city in the Negev, Dimona, okay, it's here in the bigger map, Dimona and Arad. And what you can see here is that we have the 7 bluish dots in this map are the big Bedouin towns. Rahat is here. This is the only Bedouin city in Israel. The others are big towns, and what we see in yellow are towns/villages that they used to be unrecognized, and the government of Israel has recognized them. So now they're formal settlements. And what you see in white are the unrecognized villages, somewhat called by some people the Bedouin diaspora of the Negev. These are all shacks. If any of you have been to Israel in the past, and you've been to the Negev, you probably have seen them when you drive on the streets of the Negev. You see many tents along the way. These are the unrecognized villages. Many of them surround Beersheba and Arad, as you can see, or surrounding the formal Bedouin towns. It is important when we talk about healthcare because an important factor to healthcare and health in general is the environmental conditions in which people live in. So we do know this is a slide taken from a report by the WHO, the World Health Organization. We do know that some biological factors are important for our health. This is a universal truth. So our age, our sex, our genetics, very important to our health. But actually, the social, cultural, and environmental conditions in which we live in are much more important. So when we talk about environmental conditions or cultural conditions, it means poverty, it means unemployment, sanitation, access to water, access to food, access to healthcare, the conditions of housing. So all of these, I guess it's not new to you that they are important factors in health, and it will it can predict the quality of health that a person will have later in life. So when we talk about unrecognized villages, what does that mean? It means that the state, the government, does not supply basic infrastructure to its citizens. So I do want to remind you that these are citizens. So no running water, no sewage systems, no garbage disposal, no electricity, and no permanent roads or housings. These are all photos taken from the Bedouin diaspora in the Negev, and these are issues that me as a doctor I have to deal with, because these are my patients by the end of the day. It causes, when we talk about health, it causes a lot more infectious diseases. So, for example, we have infectious diseases that we don't see in other areas of Israel, like brucellosis, which is a bacteria that it is a zoonotic disease. So we get it from cattle, for example, or from unpasteurized milk. So we see that in this community. We see a lot more fatal accidents because it is harder to get medical care because it's far away. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. And there are no roads, so if it becomes a lot more hard to get any medical assistance. We see a lot more malnutrition and learning disabilities and mental health disorders. For example, we see a lot of depression, postpartum depression, and also a lot of depression with teenagers, mostly because of house demolitions. And there are a lot of research done about this. The life expectancy is lower, in average of 7 years compared to our Jewish counterparts. Which is insane because we live in the same area, but we get different infrastructure and support from the government. We see a lot more chronic diseases and a higher prevalence of disease that can be prevented. And actually, even the Ministry of Health, the Israeli Ministry of Health, has recognized that even the unrecognized villages need some kind of healthcare support. And a report from 2008 says that providing supportive healthcare infrastructure for the Bedouin community that lives in the unrecognized villages is an essential component in promoting their health. Because today the Israeli government knows that they pay a lot for not treating Bedouins and not helping them prevent diseases. So luckily we do see a shift in this trend. This is just for a little bit more numbers. This is what I focus on, which is infant mortality rate. We do know today that the most common cause for infant mortality rate in the Bedouin community is genetic diseases and birth defects. And this is why I personally look at this index very closely and every year. But this is just for a comparison to show you a little bit of the difference and the gaps between the Bedouin community and the general population of Israel. So all of these, the Tel Sheva, Kseifa, Lakia, all of these are the large cities and towns of the Bedouins and their infant mortality rate. And this is the average for the country of Israel. So you can see how much higher it is for Bedouins compared to the average in Israel. Just again, for a comparison, the average infant mortality rate in Tel Aviv is 1.5. The average for the Arab community in Israel is 6.5. So still, when we look at the Bedouin community, they have much, much higher infant mortality rate that is comparable to what we see today in third world countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and places like this. So this was a little bit about the infrastructure and the somewhat politics of the area. And I want to move to another story that happened to me when I was an intern in the pediatrics department. I was on call in the pediatric emergency room, And I met a young lady that was very nice, and she came with her baby. He was 8 days old. And he had a fever. And as you know, I tried to do, as a very good doctor, what I did is I took his clothes off to examine him. And this is what I saw. I'm going to show a picture. So for those, it may be a little bit triggering. So just I'll let you know, for those who don't like to see nasty things, I guess. So this is what I saw. He had a necrosis of his umbilical cord and a severe infection. And this was an 8 days old infant. So he was very, very sick. And when I asked his mother, why did she come so late? Because apparently he was like this for 2 or 3 days. She said, listen, I didn't have any means to come to the hospital. It's very far away. I can't drive. I needed to wait for my husband. And also we don't have insurance, and we were afraid that you won't be able to treat us. So I came only when the situation became worse. So this was my way of understanding how important access to healthcare is. And when I talk about access to healthcare, it's not only geographic access, but also financial access, cultural access, and what I call language access also. Because access to healthcare is not only the idea of being able to reach a medical facility, but also the ability to understand what your doctor is telling you, and the ability to pay for insurance or pay for the treatment. So all these are part of what I call access to healthcare. When we talk specifically about, only about transportation and about geographic access to health, even in the recognized villages, so the villages that get formal support by the Israeli government, 60% of them don't have a primary clinic. 37% don't have access to public transportation, and it means that many people have to walk by foot more than 3 miles to the nearest clinic. It means that many people just don't go to the doctor, and if they do, they come to the hospital, which is, we only have one in this district. Also, most people get sick in the winter. And in the winter, the Negev, which is a desert, becomes somewhat like Venice, because all of the valleys become flooded from rainwaters from the mountains. So it makes it even harder for people to walk to a clinic. In the unrecognized villages, one health organization, Kupat Cholim Klalit, built 16 informal clinics, and they are basically trailer houses with generators, because they don't have electricity or running water, as I showed you before, which makes it much more difficult to store vaccines, to store drugs, and many other basic needs of a clinic. So basically, these are trailer houses with 2 rooms, one for a pediatrician, one for a family doctor, and maybe a tiny niche for some kind of a pharmacy. And of course, almost no one wants to work there, so we have much less doctors and a lot less nurses. Next story will be about a kid I met at the pediatric critical care unit. This kid was 2 years old, and he came with his father after he fell from the 4th floor of a construction building. And again, being very judgmental as I can as a doctor, I approached his father and I said, how did you take him with you to a construction building? It doesn't make any sense. And his father, weeping, told me, I wish I could, I wish I could turn back time, but I have 7 kids. This kid has no educational system to go to, no like framework or something where we live, and his mother had to stay with the other kids, and I had to take him with me. No one could have stayed with him. And he fell because there were no bars or something. He was running and falling from the building. Sadly, this kid passed away after a week in the pediatric ICU. But this was the moment I learned how the challenge of having a young community with no with no formal education system that can support it, and how hard it is to actually supervise all these young children. So just so you'd know, the Bedouin community is one of the highest, the Bedouin community of Israel specifically, is one with the highest natural growth rates in the world. It multiplies itself every 15 to 19 years. So the estimations are that only in Negev, they are currently a third of the population. The estimation is that by the year 2050, they will be 50% or even more than 50% of the population, and will surpass the million citizens. They have about 10,000 births per year. The fertility rate the average fertility rate for a Bedouin woman in her fertility years is about 5.4 kids. And this means that basically most of the Bedouin population Bedouin society are kids. 50% of them are younger than 18, 60% are younger than 20. The median age is 16.5. And a fifth of the kids under the age of 5 have no schools to go to, schools or kindergartens. Or everything is that happens there is kind of grassroots initiatives that are not being supported by authorities. Also, it is a very poor community. So they have a lot of kids. They can't pay to anyone to guard their kids or teach their kids, and they have to work, and they work 24/7 because they don't get salaries that are they can help them support their families. So some more information. The average wage of the Bedouin men is 5,200 shekels a month. It's about $1,300, something like this. It's less than the minimum wage in Israel. And this is the average wage for Bedouins. The unemployment rates are very, very high. These are what you see here. These are employment rates. So only 24% of Bedouin women work, and only 56% of Bedouin men work, compared to much higher percentages in the Jewish community. Many of them can't graduate high school. Only less than 5% have some kind of an academic degree. So I guess you can understand how challenging can it be to create a social mobility, and make these people change their futures. So all of this is to talk a little bit about challenges, and me and my team, we had to figure out how can we make prevention the easiest choice of action. It seems like everything is very, very difficult. So how can you make prevention easy? How can you make anything easy in this situation when you have no access to healthcare, and you have no funds, and you have no you have a lot of cultural restrictions? So all these are challenges that we had to face when we started our organization called Odaina, and try to prevent genetic disease and birth defects. So these are some of the strategies that we are using, but the idea is first start with the people. So we figured that the most important strength, or the biggest strength of the Bedouin community, is that it is a community. People take care of each other because they have a lot of trust issues with authorities. They trust each other. They trust their doctors. They trust their neighbors. So we learned that in order to create a social change, you have to engage the community, and you have to make them spread the word. So we use what we call social diffusion, and a lot of the things that we do are passed by word of mouth from one neighbor to another, because of the trust we've created with the community and with and they have with each other. So instead of what the Ministry of Health used to do, which, coming with big campaigns, telling people to, not marry their cousins and not understanding really the culture, we did it differently. We were changing bottom up. I'll show you in a second how it was done. But the idea was to go from one house to another, from one school to another, talk to people, create leadership within the community that will spread the word. And also we cooperated with local leaderships, because we understand that people from the Bedouin community, again, they don't trust the ministries, they don't trust the Israeli government, but they do trust their Imams, the religious leaders. They do trust their school principals, their doctors, their mayors. So these are the people who became our ambassadors in the field to educate people about their health challenges and how can they be prevented, and also advocate for the Bedouin community when talking to the government. So the local leaders have important roles both with the community and with the government, and they create a bridge between the two. Now, today, 6 years later, I can say that we've managed to pass a governmental decision that gives specific budgets for the Bedouin community on different issues, not only healthcare, but also building new towns, building roads, law enforcement, education, and employment specifically for women. So this was thanks to the engagement of local leadership. Fourth is the importance of collaborations with our Jewish neighbors. So we understood that we can't do it alone. And I am glad to say that the idea behind Odaina was a model that was actually started by an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York. And their model was, maybe some of you know, but their organization is called Dor Shorim. What they do is that they provide screening genetic tests for Jewish teenagers before they find their shidduch, before they find their arranged marriage status. And we are basically adapting this model to the Bedouin community, together with our Jewish partners. And I am proud to say that my co-founder is an ultra-Orthodox Jew from Mea Shearim who did the test herself when she was 17, and we've been able to advocate for it because and to actually make it happen because we looked at our similarities and not at our differences. And also, it takes a lot of courage to say, I know that we have a problem and I want to fix it, but I don't know how and I need help. And this is where aid and support comes in. And I think this is also the way to build trust. This is some of the things that we're doing. One, as you can see, is women's groups in mosques. We really believe in women empowerment and the importance of women in decision making in Bedouin homes, and we give them the respect they deserve. And instead of waiting for them to come to us, by understanding that they have a lot of geographic and financial challenges to come to clinics and the hospital, we come to them. We find the people where they are, and we try not to be judgmental, but actually teach them genetics. I don't think that people need to graduate high school in order to understand the idea of inheritance, and we're proving it every day. We talk to women who never went to school, and they understand the concept of genetics and why and how genetic diseases happen, and they want to get the test. And then another challenge that we overcame is doing the tests in the field. So we're not waiting for people to come to the hospital, but we are providing screening tests in houses, in schools, and in wherever people want. And actually, COVID made it much easier because we had to fight the authorities in order to do that. But then COVID happened, and doing tests everywhere, specifically genetic tests like the PCR, became a very, very common thing. So I have to say that it made it easier for us. Also, this is the Imams forum. So Imams are religious leaders. These are the Imam is a leader of a mosque. Okay, something similar to a rabbi, and they speak to their congregations every Friday. So we bring them to the hospital once a month to talk about something that has some health issues. So it can be. We do talk about genetics, but we talk about smoking, and we talk about diabetes and many other things. And they talk about this in their Friday talks in the mosques. And last but not least, we understand the importance of language. This is also something that we learned with time, that even the information that the Ministry of Health is spreading in Arabic is either not updated or in a very bad and broken Arabic that the people who wrote it are people from the military, so they know mostly military Arabic or Fusha, which is like written Arabic, and this is how the information is written. So just imagine that you will go into your health insurance website, okay, or whatever, you open Google because you want to look for something about a disease, and the English that the information is written in is Shakespearean English. This is basically what we have. So we had to rewrite everything. So we've translated the information in a language that people understand, but also by understanding that many people are illiterate and they can't really read. We also created videos that are short, understandable, with a lot of visuals, with someone who's telling you the information, so people won't have to, won't miss the information just because they can't read. So all of these are our way to overcome the challenges. And lastly, I'll finish by this, so just so you'll know that we do have some results. This is how we started. This is 2016. This is the infant mortality rate in the Negev, the average for Bedouins compared to the average in the Jewish community of the Negev. And this is 2019. Today it's even lower. The infant mortality rate dropped in 30%, now even more than 30%, after a plateau of almost more than 10 years. We've started to see a decrease, which is really exciting. And hopefully we can close the gaps in the next decade. Now I'll end by a quote that I really love by a poet from Uruguay, Eduardo Galeano, that says, "I don't believe in charity, I believe in solidarity." And I think this sums up some of our work, because the idea behind Rodaina is that we're not doing this because we think that, Bedouins are poor and they need our help, but because we all live in the same place, and we know that when my neighbor feels good, then I will feel good too, and we have to do it together because we all live in the same place, and this is the importance of solidarity. So thank you, and I think now is time to open it for question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yasmeen, for that very effective presentation. And now I will open it up for questions. And if anybody would like to ask a question, why don't they raise their hand? I think Ruth Kaplan.
Hi, Boker Tov. It's the second time I've heard Yasmeen's presentation, and I learned a lot more this time as well. So thank you. It's so important for us to understand these challenges. I actually have a few questions, if it's okay. One is, I know it's a kind of a much bigger topic that deserves probably its own presentation, but I'd love it if you could give just a little bit more context to the whole issue of unrecognized settlements, because I know there are issues about property in the Negev, and about there's lots of issues, and so if you could just give a little bit more context to that. The second question I have is whether the fact that the Ra'am party is now part of the coalition in Israel with Mansour Abbas, whether that's had a positive impact on budget issues or other issues regarding, particularly with the unrecognized villages getting better services, or anything you can comment about that. And my third question is whether this year, as a Wexner Fellow, has if it's contributed to your any thoughts about the future of your organization. Have you gained any leadership insights that could be helpful going forward? So I know those are three big questions. So whatever you can comment would be appreciated. Thanks, Yasmeen.
Sure. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for these questions. Very important. You're right. The context for the unrecognized villages deserve maybe a series of lectures. And this is why I didn't talk about this, but I'm glad you brought it up. I can say very briefly that the Bedouin narratives, and it is supported by research done in Ben-Gurion University, is that Bedouins used to be nomads, and they were all around the Middle East and North Africa, and some thousands of them were in the desert area of the Negev and south of Hebron in the West Bank in 1948. So after the Nakba, the War of Independence happened in 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel, some Bedouins stayed in what was now the borders of Israel. But Ben-Gurion's administration what they did was declare martial law over all Arab towns in Israel. The Bedouins were not arranged in towns. So what they did was forcing the ones who stayed in the area to this triangle that I showed you in the map, without declaring any formality of these towns. They didn't really know what to do with them. So some Bedouins, a few of them, before the establishment of the State of Israel, did purchase land from the Ottomans. And they still have their kushans, the document that show that they own some of the lands. Others don't, because it wasn't part of their culture. They didn't feel like that they need a document to stay on a land. But the basic narrative is that they were moved to a certain area, and after a while, because the State of Israel was working to build more and more Jewish towns in many areas, including the Negev. Whenever, and this happens until today, whenever the government decides to build a Jewish town, and there's a Bedouin tribe in the area, they have to move. And this has created a political dispute between Bedouins and Jews. And today, the problem is even worse, because there are hundreds of thousands of Bedouins. I must say that in the north part of the country, all of the villages were recognized. I think it was around the 80s, after a settlement with their leaders. But in the south, it didn't happen yet, and most of the disputes are about ownership of the land. And basically the narrative of the Bedouins that they are being continuously displaced from one place to another, and they have been going through this process of sedentarization. They did lose some of their nomadic identity, but now they are also not being, they are not being entitled to any formal place. So this is part of the conflict. I will say that along the years, the government has decided, tried at least to solve it, but to solve it in ways that are not respectful of the culture. Similar to what I told you about the genetic diseases or the marriages inside the family. So same is by saying to a Bedouin who his entire life and his entire history was working in agriculture, that you will now live in a building in a city. This sometimes it doesn't fit. So part of what the Bedouins ask for is to have recognized villages that are not necessarily cities, that can be agricultural farms, for example, similar to what Jews have in the Arava. So these are the current disputes about this, and a huge problem is that because there are no conversations about this, the right-wing government, or at least parts of the government, try to displace Bedouins in other means. For example, afforestation that was happening a few months ago, because the land in the Negev is now formally owned by Keren Kayemet Israel, which is maybe as JNF, the Jewish National Fund, and they have a law. They have their own rule of not selling land to Arabs. So this is you get into a bigger context of land disputes between Arabs and Jews in this small area. So this is like the tip of the iceberg when we talk about context. For your second question about Ram, for those of you who don't know, is an Arab party that is now part of the Israeli government. It is a party of the Islamic Brotherhood. It's somewhat of a historic situation in Israel that we have an Arab party in the government. It does have its benefits. Actually, one of them was Bedouin, but sadly he passed away this year of a heart attack. And we did feel some of its benefits. So, for example, the governmental decision, I really believe that it was, it was passed, thankfully for them. But I must be honest, and even the Netanyahu administration, the former prime minister, gave some budgets to the Bedouins. And the first governmental decision to give budgets to Bedouins actually what happened in 2017, and it was under Netanyahu. So we should say, I should give the credit when he deserves it, and I think the trend started even before got in the government, but they do. We do feel a difference now in the treatment that the Arabs are getting in Israel. And I'm sorry, Ruth, can you repeat the question about Wexners?
Or just whether you've learned less. What I know, it's a focus is on leadership development in Wexners. So are there ways in which you feel that there are takeaways from this year that we'll be applying to the way you view your role going forward in Israel?
Well, yes. First, I think first I'm glad to learn and get to know many of Israel's leadership in the government, who are my colleagues and fellows in the Wexner Fellowship. I think the most important thing that I learned this year was the importance of time and how processes take time, and that we should respect that, and that revolutions don't happen overnight. That's a false claim. We need patience, but we need to be stubborn also. And luckily, I found in the Wexner Fellowship people who are like-minded, and we're on the same page, and we're fighting for a better future for all of Israel's citizens, and making it a better place.
Thank you.
Okay, Joel had a question in the chat about access to birth control.
Okay, yeah, right. I'll read it. Do Bedouins want so many children, or do they lack access to birth control? So this is a very good question. That has a lot of I'll start by saying that there's a religious part to it. We see it in many religions, like the idea of bringing a lot of children. Even in Judaism, we say there's the mitzvat pur urvu. So according to the Muslim religion, they should have a lot of kids. That's kind of our gift to God. So this is one thing. But when you look at scientific data, we also understand that there's correlation between education and the amount of children in a family. And specifically speaking, there's a strong correlation between women's education and the number of children in the family. And I think it takes two to tango. So one, there is the religion thing, and there's the cultural thing of having more children. But on the other hand, there's the policy thing and keeping women and men not having getting good education. That has also, part of the explanation on why they have so many children. We see that's basically the difference between, Western countries and some other Eastern, low or middle income countries. There is access to birth control, but there are some cultural and religious restrictions, and some are very afraid. I mean, some religious leaders are banning or are very much against birth controls. Another thing that we've learned through the process of what we do in Rodina is that there's no sex education in high schools. I remember the first time we entered a school to teach about genetics and teach about family planning. We went into a school in Rahat. I think it was for 9th graders. We split the classes. We talked to boys and girls separately, and when we spoke to the girls, I remember one raised her hand and asked, "Listen, but I understand everything you say about planning pregnancy and stuff like that, but what if I it's not because of the fear of genetic diseases. What if I don't want to have kids until I'm 25? What do I do then?" And this was the first time for us that we understood that many of them don't even know of the possibility of using oral contraceptives, condoms, stuff like that. And this became part of our mission, to have also sexual educations in schools and talk about birth controls, because it's a taboo. No one speaks about it.
In terms of that taboo, are you talking specifically about schools in the Bedouin community, or are you talking about schools, for a larger part of Israel?
Mostly in the Bedouin community. I know for a fact, in my, in the school that I went to, which was Jewish Hebrew speaking school, that we did have sex education. We did talk about this, and it was very well known. I don't know what is going on in Arab schools in other parts of the country.
Okay. I don't see another raised hand. There's another question in the chat. How did your own...
There's I think Mark and Naomi are waiting for a while.
Question.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't see. I'm having trouble with colors. I see this.
Okay.
The color contrast is not very good there. I'm sorry, Mark and Naomi.
Thank you. And thank you for doing all this, Yasmeen. I really appreciate your speaking and the effort you're doing in Israel. A couple of questions. One had to do with education, because you talk about a small number of people who graduate from high school, and a smaller number who have advanced degrees. How do they get to school at all? You also showed the case of a boy who was brought to his father's construction site because there was no place for him. Are there schools in the villages? Can people get to them? Is there a cost? How do they even get elementary education, never mind more advanced? And my other question is, with a side thank you to the Brotherhood for bringing you to speak at Amuna, are you doing things like this at other synagogues or other Jewish organizations to involve the community? Because I think you would make a lot of connections within the Jewish community, perhaps the Muslim community as well, but I can't speak for that. Just wondering if you're doing a lot of this outreach work. And Naomi has a question.
I have some questions also about the factors that contribute to the decline in infant mortality, but that's a separate, if you've done any multivariable analyses or whatever of that change. That's 3 questions.
No, that's a good question. I'll start with the question about the synagogues because it's easy. I mean, whenever I have the opportunity and the chance, I do talk to other communities happily. I'm always happy to share our story. Regarding the education part. So again, as almost everything is in Israel, it's complicated, and it always, there are many parts to the story. So first, it's a matter of policy, and when I say policy, I mean that Israel has 4 different segregated educational systems: the secular Jewish one, the independent religious, which is like the ultra-Orthodox system, the the state religious, which is the ones of the what we call today National Zionists, and the Arab education system. There's a full segregation between the Arab education system and the Jewish education system. This is why my parents wanted us to move. I couldn't learn in a Jewish school if I didn't live in a Jewish community. And the gaps between these educational systems are enormous. There's a lot of information about this, and I would love to share. I mean, if you want, I can share some reports. But this is some kind of a consensus. Whoever you speak to in Israel will tell you that this is a matter of policy. I mean, the amount of the budget that the Minister of Education gives to schools in the Arab community is very, very different than the budget that the Jews schools get, and it is translated to the quality of education that the students get. But this is one part. The second part is the Bedouin part, because it takes two to tango. And again, if I have to be honest, I will say that we have our own issues. I mean, there is a lot of tribalism in the Bedouin community, and it means that in many places the principals of a school will be chosen by their influence in the community, okay, or being sons to an influential tribe, or like the biggest tribe in the area, without the knowledge or the skills needed to lead a school. So we find schools being led by people sometimes who can't read, and it's only because of their family. I mean, their family name. So this is another challenge that we need to face, and then they can't even improve themselves because they don't know how. And they're very corrupt. So this creates this perpetual cycle of neglect, of whatever exists in the educational system in the Bedouin community. To add to that, all of the towns, all of the what I showed you, the big Bedouin towns, they're not very big. They have like thousands of residents. They do have schools within them. The unrecognized don't have schools. They don't have kindergarten. They don't have kindergarten, but they are organized in what we call regional councils that do provide to some places transportation to schools in other towns. So there are some kind of interim solutions, but they're not perfect. So this is, I believe, the biggest challenge of the Bedouin community. However, the Bedouin community goes through an amazingly fast transition to be more urbanized and more educated. And if my father had to go to Haifa to study engineering, and he was one of the very few who did that back then, was like the 70s. Today, almost every family in the Bedouin community that have the means to do that sends their kids to school, and we have many who send their mostly sons to Europe to study medicine. We see more women get into colleges and the universities, so there is some positive trajectory on that end. And the last question was about the infant mortality rate, which was a very clever question. And that's true. I didn't talk about this. We can't take credit for all the the decrease that happened, but we did have some multifactorial analysis on this to show the importance of the screening tests, and it was significant. We also see that there is a decrease in infant mortality that is significant for the Bedouin community, but without any decrease in infant mortalities in a Jewish community in the same area. But yes, we do have data about this.
Okay, great. Finally, there's a question in the chat about the origin of the Bedouin community. How did it get to be a distinct community?
Okay, I'm reading from the chat if it's fine. Which one do you mean?
The second to last question. Something else was added after that.
Well, Sharon's question also is in the queue. I don't know how much time we have.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm fine as long as you are. I mean, I don't mind. So Sharon asks, how did your own parents, and particularly your father, who went to Technion, make such a change from the past? Wow, this is a huge story. Another series of lectures. But both my parents were revolutionaries. And they both appreciated education very much. My mother, who was not Bedouin, was born in the northern part of Israel, close to Hadera, in a small village called Jat, and her father was a school principal, and he wanted the best education for her. So she actually learned in Nazareth in a convent. And later on became an English teacher. And my father, he always makes a joke. He was the youngest in his family. And he knew that everyone is going to get married and leave the house, and he will stay with the sheep. And he didn't want to be a shepherd. And he said that my only way of not being a shepherd is by going to school. And he had they were a gang of 8 men, teenagers at the time, and they fought to study in school. And back then it wasn't really, like I said, it was a tent with sand sacks, and they studied together with first graders to 4th grade, and then from 5th grade to 8th grade in the same tent. And when they graduated 8 years of studying, they protested to have another year, and after that, their teacher said, "I can't help you open a high school here, but I can help you find another one." So they, cutting a very long story short, they moved to Tira in the north of Israel, and they rented an apartment there for 3 years. They graduated high school. My father says that it was the first time he has ever been in a building, in an actual building. He said it was like a magic to him to touch a wall and then suddenly see a light from the ceiling, because they never had that when he grew up. But this was when he decided to go. He wanted to be a doctor, honestly, and he studied biology for 1 year. In the Technion, in a language that he didn't know Hebrew by then. He kind of learned by doing, but then figure out it wasn't for him. So he went and studied engineering instead, and came back to help his own community. And I feel like both of them, my mother and my father, gave that powerful sense of belonging and the obligation to help our community to every one of us. We're 5 siblings, and I owe it to them. Like, they made a lot of bold decisions through life that made things much, much easier for me. And they were leading the change in their own communities. Okay, I think the next question is by Joel. How are the Bedouin different racially from Israeli Arabs? Good question. They don't see themselves as different racially. It's more of an ethnic difference that is being, it's not very much clear anymore. But I must say that even within the Arab community in Israel, there is a lot of racism. I mean, there's a lot of discrimination and arrogance in a way. And the Bedouins are, because of their need to stay close to their historic culture, sometimes are being perceived by other Arabs in Israel as primitive, inferior, not educated. Going back to my father's story, before they moved to Tira, honestly, they moved to Nazareth. He and his friends, and they couldn't stay for more than 2 weeks there because they were bullied by the Christian Arabs in Nazareth in the high school, because they were, they kept bullying them for being Bedouins and being from, the village and not knowing anything about life. So we still have that until today. A lot of backlash and a lot of racism, basically, from other Arab groups. But honestly, when they speak the same language, they have the same traditions. It's basically like there's a lot of similarities there. But sometimes, I don't know, people find it hard to see similarities and they see only differences. So I hope I answered this one.
And one last one in the chat.
Yeah. How do Bedouins earn the money to move to Haifa? I think, I mean, I don't know if you mean my father's story or today, or I'm not really sure I understand the question, but I can say that from my, going back to my father's story, he didn't have the money. His brother helped him. His brother was a truck driver and gave him a lot of, the money he earned. And my father had to, he did everything in order to stay in the university. He cleaned houses, he cleaned staircases, he was working in the fruit market. He did basically whatever he could to pay for his tuition. I do want to say that tuition is a lot less here, I mean, in Israel than in the United States. Much cheaper, but it is still a huge investment. So it was. We do what we need to do in order to get education, but it's a problem for many people. This is why it's inaccessible for many of the Bedouins.
Can I ask one more question? Do you have a moment for one more question?
I do. I don't know what are the plans for the.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for this talk. It's been very interesting. And I have a question regarding your company that you developed out of Our Generation Speaks. And I'm wondering, are you able to grow your company? Are there any sources of funding that are enabling you to continue your work? Is the government at all aware that, maybe through your leadership, they should make an investment into this project and develop it further?
Oh, yes, right. I didn't talk about this, but last year, the government has decided to pay for all the tests. So they did subsidize a few before we started. Like a few, it means 5 diseases per person, which is basically nothing. But now they subsidize the whole thing, which is a great achievement. And I must say, when we started with private donors in the Boston area, and we have great relationship with the community here in the East Coast of the United States that cares a lot about Israel's community, and this is how we started, and we're very thankful for it. And today we're actually part of we've started together with other Bedouin leaders another organization called Yanabia. Yanabia is springs in Arabic, and the idea behind this organization is to be some kind of an umbrella organization that sees the future of the Bedouin community and pushes for development in 5 major areas: education, employment, human capital, health, and housing. And we are now part of this collaboration, part of this organization, and growing from there. This was what helped us pass the governmental decision, get the budgets, and we are now working closely with many of the Israeli ministries, including, the Ministry of Agriculture, of Education, of Finance, in order to bring more development to this community. To be honest, it was like the inspiration was the joint, the JDC, as an organization that zooms out and sees the goals for the Jewish community in Israel and out of it. And this is what we're trying to do now. We're expanding to build prevention models to other diseases. We're expanding to talk more about prenatal care, and not only about genetic diseases, but other things that happen to women when they're pregnant. And hopefully in the future, now that Israel has better relationships with Arab countries like the Emirates, in Saudi Arabia and Morocco, we even dream of expanding internationally.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Okay, great. So finally, I want to thank Yasmeen for a very effective presentation and for all of her comments. We all appreciate it very much. I want to thank everybody who's here for participating. And this concludes our speaker series for the year, and we'll be starting up again next year. David, anything else you want to add?
No, just great. Thanks. This was a wonderful presentation, Yasmeen. Really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who turned up to watch it. And we recorded this, and so we'll have a video available if people want to come back and review it later on the recording. So thank you again.
All right, great.
Tremendous.
All right, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.